Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana, and we are back for another episode that is connected to our read of Cold and Deadly by Toni Anderson. And this is one of those picks where it is a good mashup between both of us and having a discussion around this. Listen, and I already told Rachel, y'all, I read this book a couple of times, and every time I feel another layer that I like about it. I don't know if I think this is my jam, but it is something that I definitely would recommend more than once. And so we're starting to see that, and we'll see that even more as we discuss characters today. But before we get into characters, Rachel, what do you have going on over there that you are willing to share with us?
Okay, this is like half relevant and half not, but this is a part of like, I'm gonna say that it's relevant because I feel this is very much like a part of the like Story Cipher brand, because I am a multimedia girly, right? Like this is, I do video games, I talk about story structure in video games, I like, the history of how things came together, so this is just kind of the way that I approach things, so this is how I'm arguing for the relevance of what I'm about to tell you. Which is not a really strong start when I'm like, it's relevant, and I'm going to explain why. But so Trevor and I took Trevor, my husband, and I took on this really cool project for this summer. So Trevor comes from film studies, so he's spent a lot of time studying film history and how film works. And because I'm someone who likes to explore different mediums and how they function as storytelling mechanisms, film is one of those things, right? Because it's a visual medium, and there's ways of communicating that don't apply in the same way to novels or video games or whatever. And so we're going through movie history right now, which is really, really interesting, because one of the first things that you'll notice is early films don't have narrative structure, because nobody knew what film was yet, right? Like they have film, like they have cameras that can now capture movement, but no sound. And you kind of watch this progression of like, what is this medium? And so you have these kind of movies that are like, one of them, we didn't watch the whole thing because it was like, oh my God, 3 hours long or something. That was like Soviet propaganda, right? And it's more images, it's moving images that are kind of stitched together to create implication rather than a fully fledged narrative. And then even when you start getting into narrative structure, you start to see that it's not narrative structure the way that we like it to be, right? So it's not fully tight. It's not all the way where, now we consume narrative in very there's a very clear structure that that audiences tend to prefer, and that feel like, it's the pacing that we like. And that's honestly, like, that's so much of why you and I both teach 4-act structure the way that we do, because it is the narrative structure that audiences, the widest amount, or the widest kind of swath of audience prefers in storytelling. And that's the difference too between like the classics. When you read the classics, they don't follow a lot of, like, they have narrative structure, but they don't follow necessarily the tight pacing or the prose that we prefer, because of how the medium has developed over time. And so it's cool to see that in film, because we're moving through movies and watching the medium develop, and watching, but also seeing how quickly film became clearly it quickly started to form a narrative structure, and realize that it's a really great medium for telling cohesive stories. So I've gotten to see Buster Keaton, we're doing Charlie Chaplin. Again, I saw clips from weird Soviet propaganda film, which I can't remember. It's very famous. I can't remember the title of it though. Got to see like an early kind of thriller that I think I think M is the title, and it's like a German film that was translated No, I think it was only subtitled. It wasn't even translated into English. So this exploration has been so fun as a part of the overall explorations that I like to do with every kind of medium. So we have video games, we have movies, and I'm watching, similar phenomena happen in the written medium as well. When you read classics and you move through time and you see genres begin to develop and story structure begin to tighten into what we know it is now. And so that's kind of at the moment it's like a personal undertaking that I'm doing, but it's kind of always connecting back into the way that I approach all of my other work and kind of understand how to work with narrative structure. So I'm taking a movie history class hosted by Trevor, and it's been a really, really interesting.
Oh my, did you guys go see Sinners?
No, we haven't been. Yeah, we haven't been to any movie theater to see any movie in quite some time. But I really want to go see it.
Tell him to please put that on, because listen, you're talking about this. I was thinking about it. I was like, I think I may go see it again, and I've just seen it go up on pre-order because we love movies, so we buy a lot of movies. Yeah. And so I was like, I think I'm just gonna buy it because I was just thinking about the aspects of where it departs from traditional horror.
Oh, nice.
And I think that would be a very interesting take in the fact that they brought in the historical context of African American spiritual things like Southern. And even just stemming from Africa, but then also bridging that with Irish history and almost folklore. A very interesting take, and also how they chose to end it. And I haven't heard a lot of people even talk about that. I think it would be very interesting to look at it from a stance of movie structure and story structure, because it to me doesn't move like a traditional horror story.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was actually sitting and I was talking about it in another filming that I was like, it's not, because of a lot of the undercurrents is romance or relational versus in your traditional horror. That's not it, right?
Yeah.
That's not the point. And so by the time they bring all of that in, it just makes it so it's a very interesting dynamic. So yeah, I think that's cool that y'all share that. We just be watching stuff, child. But and Keeman is always yelling, what's that in your stories when somebody does that? They're running. I don't know. Look, they're running. I don't know. Still pause. Right. You pause. So what's that? What's that right there when they do that in a story?
I love that.
Acting a fool? I don't know. But no, he's getting better at it. He's getting better. I think that's cool. So how many movies do you guys have? Is it like a certain number that you're trying to, like a list or something, or he's just picking some of his favorites? Like what's guiding this journey?
Yes. So this is probably a question that Trevor could answer better than me, because I'm just along for the ride. I don't know. But we are moving chronologically, and he's picking, essentially the way he's done it is he's created a list, and he did all this research leading up to it. Like he has a whole Google Doc that has like, here's the movie we're doing, here's how it contributed to film, here's why it's important, and so just like, so it's we're taking a sampling of movies chronologically through time to see the developments in the medium and how it's changed, because of course movies take a long time to create, and so you'll get a cluster of films that come out, and then you're kind of like picking the one that like exemplifies a certain phenomenon or a certain contribution or a certain pattern in storytelling at the time, and so it's like moving us through like chronologically and picking that sampling of here's what was happening in movies, here's how it shifted, and so you're kind of tracking it through time.
All right, tell Trevor I said, and then we're going to jump into this discussion, because I think tell Trevor I said he needs to make sure he have him some black noir on there, so he needs some 90s African-American movies like Brown Sugar, or, well, it's a little bit after like Poetic Justice and all that, but I would say like Brown Sugar, it just kind of, or a couple of, if not one, Spike Lee, not the most recent one, but Spike Lee movies.
Yeah.
And so you're just
the early 90s on there, because
come on,
Trent.
Yes. Listen,
Trevor knows.
love and basketball, something like that. Come on, because I'm be over looking at that list. Where the black people at? Come on. But I think I had some fun.
Yeah, it's been super good. I feel like we should at some point, like when we have one of our bonus episodes, maybe we should just do a bonus episode and talk about Sinners. I think that would be if we just put like, hey, spoiler alert at the beginning so we can just talk about whatever. Because movies are shorter, you can consume them more quickly, so then you can like watch the movie and then listen to the episode. That would be a good juicy bonus episode.
Maybe that, or even I was thinking about it would be interesting for us to have like a quarter or whatever, because we sort of do our picks in like a 3 picks round of like books that turned into movies.
Ooh.
Yes, because
there's a hot topic.
Yes, because listen, because a couple of them I just really like, but I think it's something very interesting. I was doing a response because in our community we have what I call Ask Away, where they can submit written questions or writing samples. And one of the questions that came up was like, like writing a kissing scene, like especially when you're in a sweet romance and that's the only like intimacy really that they sort of get in the story. And it's like you wait till it's like a Hallmark movie where you wait till they only get that one kiss at the end. You better make it count. And what I like to do is do an exercise of finding it in a movie and turning off the sound.
Oh, nice.
Yes. And so, looking at movies as inspiration is very helpful because you can consume it, but at the same time, having an opportunity to understand where they get an advantage that we don't have, and we have to reclaim that advantage with our words.
Yeah.
Right. And how do we do that? And how do we layer that? And how do we layer that in our writing and our structure? And so I think it's a very interesting conversation, and even talking through, some choices where as a writer, you would never take this moment out, but for the sake of time and budgeting or whatever, those moments are clipped out. And so, yeah, definitely. Yep. I think that would be so cool.
Ooh, we have some juicy episodes coming down the
Come on. So I think that's it. Like for me over here, we are still boot camping it up. Because you got to do something that's adjacent, I'm going to do something adjacent for real. I think I've been on the hamster wheel of whether I really want to write this nonfiction book.
Ooh, we have talked about this at length, because I gotta be honest, Dana, this nonfiction book is the bane of your existence. Like, you hate this thing. There are so many things I've watched to be like, I don't want to do this, but you just kind of hold your nose and you do it. But this thing, like, this has turned, like, brought out your, like, dig my heels in and like, no, I don't want to do it. And it's giving you a run for your money right now.
I know. I feel like, I don't know. I think it's because I feel like I'm like in a role a lot of times of a course creator, that you have this opportunity to approach something in a way that feels very practical and tangible. That when I see a book in nonfiction with writing books, I feel like it could just turn on this like wah, 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 like Charlie Brown in my head, even for someone who loves to write, because my jam is fiction. So it's like, I think that's part of it. But then I feel like it can be, for lack of a better term, a gateway drug. It can be an introduction.
I love it that of all the analogies we could have picked from, like, oh, this is how I introduce my audience to me. You're like, it's your gateway drug for Dana.
Come on. So I keep feeling like, one moment I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Then another moment I'm like, just do it already, or just do it and you can change your mind once you've done the draft. And I'm back on the just do the draft and you can change your mind later if you want to change your mind. So I don't know. I just feel like, I think it could be something like, it could be partially of a limited belief. And then another part of it could be just, I feel like there's so many, and I feel like it's a lot more subjective when it comes to writing craft than most books make it out to be. Like, it makes it out to be like it's this objective thing. But I think there's a lot of subjectivity to it that I feel like there's no way you can do it justice. And so,
I think the thing, and that's one of those things where, like, especially over the years, like, I've come to, like, recognize, like, look, this, at the end of the day, this is still a creative, like, art, which means that the way you approach it, like, we teach structure, and we teach, like, hey, like, look, this is going to have your best bet as of, the people enjoying the pacing and all, but, like, it is still an art form, which makes it can be kind of squishy, and it can be, and the way that someone approaches it. And I think that's one of the things that I love about it, is that, like, you can essentially make your stand about, like, this is how I recommend people approach it, or this is how I approach it at any rate. And that's going to work for someone because everybody's so different. So, like, so where one person finds one craft book more helpful than another, like, your book gets to be that other, for someone who's like, well, these didn't really click for me. Then there's going to be those people for whom your book specifically clicks, because there's a gazillion ways to do it. There's 100,000 ways to think about it, and you just kind of get to scope out your little, like, plot of land and say, like, hey, this is how I think about it. And for anyone for whom this is helpful, you can come hang out with me over here and we'll have a really good time, And so I think that's the nice thing about working in a creative discipline, but it's also the part that's, like, that makes it real this is tough, because then you have to, like, draw some more concrete lines, where concrete lines aren't really prone to being drawn because it's not that cut and dry. I'm a little curious, like, would you rather express that, like, would you feel better expressing that information through a different medium that's not like, does it feel like it has to be a nonfiction book and that's why it's, like, agonizing?
I feel like it's more of a thing of like stepping into something that I don't know if I want to step into, if we're keeping it 100. So the reason why I feel compelled to allow myself to explore it and do it is because I feel like it would be the best approach for my students and people who don't know me. And that having a solid foundation that can sort of be consumed in a shorter period of time versus it being hours of a course, and then you can go into a course and sort of blow it out, then I think that makes it interesting. And I do also feel like there's aspects of it that I am certain I have not seen anywhere ever. And it makes me feel a little bit responsible because of that aspect of it. There's not a lot in the area, I think, that I work in a lot. I mean, there's out there, but I think you probably now have more courses than you did back in the day. And you don't have as many books, you know what I mean? And I think the final consideration would be, now I think because you have content moving so rapidly between people creating courses, people having memberships, like, there's so many different ways to consume information now that you really don't have as many books that you see coming out of this area. And so so those are the things. And so I keep trying to tell myself, any of it's not my concern. My concern is sort of to, like, have this thing where you can say, okay, here. And so I'm trying to let that portion guide my steps. That's the way I would say it. So,
well, I listen, not to toot my own horn, but if there's one thing that I know how to do, it's how to ask you questions and get the, like, get the gears moving and get the words flowing. So you listen, you sit down for a couple of sessions with your old pal Rachel, and I
Come
feel
on.
like honestly, if we sit down, because we used to sit on the, like, we had to start putting time limits on our meetings because we'd be on for 4, 5, 6 hours. So we sit down for like a couple of juicy sessions. I mean, I would say 2, 3 sessions, you've got the whole book just in transcript, in order. Now we just start moving it, you know?
And here's the part that makes it suck for me is I have all that.
Yeah, I know. You've got course transcripts, you've got the whole, you honestly, all the raw materials are there.
Yeah. So I know I keep telling listen, we're gonna come back around to this. I think. Listen, I'm gonna put this down on wax. This, even though this is not wax, like, you know, but that's old school. But I'm putting it down that I think by the end of the summer, beginning of fall, I should have a draft.
Ooh, you heard it first here, ladies and gentlemen. So
Girl.
by the end of summer, y'all hit us up in the comments and be like, Dana, how'd that draft do?
And then I'm gonna say, what draft? Oh my gosh. So we shall see. I mean, I just keep telling myself, you already have it. I mean, I have everything. It's just, it's like, I feel like it's suck it up buttercup.
Yeah. Which I feel like,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's because you do that in everything else. This is the one place where you're like, I always suck it up. Do I have to do it here too? Like, ugh.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that is so true. I'm like, ugh. But I think the thing too is like the more that it's almost like the more content that you have, it's almost like dictates the more you have like a simple foundational something for them to be able to take in, gobble up, and be like, okay, like, to get their bearings. And I think that's probably makes me more inclined to do it than most people. Like, they just want to see a book with their name on it. Like, that's
Well,
for
you
this.
don't have that problem because you have a gazillion books with all 20 of your names.
All the
on
names,
it.
okay? All the names. It is so true. So I just get over the fact that things change, and now, because of having some like students and needing to sort of codify things that I didn't feel compelled to do before, it makes it so that it's just a lot more. I think it's necessary.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it. Ugh. Even now, I don't feel excited. I mean, I feel excited on one side, but I don't feel excited about it. And I think that may be the other thing. But I think it's just it's just doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting because
is.
you know, there are loads of things that you're not like excited about, that you're like, yeah, but I know the role it's going to play in the whole, so I can do it. This one, you know the role it plays in the whole, you know why you need it, you know what it's for, you have the materials, but it's like, but this is the one thing where somehow those things are like not enough to like just
do
push
it.
you over
I think,
the edge.
yeah, and it may even be just because like if it's. I think what I'm probably gonna have to do is like take off the edge of like this should be. It should represent this particular thing, like that it's a final draft, because I think that's where writing a book differs to me than doing a course. I think doing a course and having that sort of, even in a community, it is still fluid, right? It can be changed. And when you talk about a book, it's like, ooh, like it's like, I don't know why. And I don't feel that way even about my novels, that it feels so like, and then by the time you put your name on it, and it's like, so I know I'm not making much sense, but I am going to. I feel like it will happen, and that I am letting the suck it up buttercup like lead the charge, just until I start having fun. And I think once I start being able to get clear about some of the areas where I just haven't wrote about a lot, because I have been starting to write chapters. That I think that's the part that's going to make me feel excited, because I think there's just certain things that I just have that's just like my jam in it.
Yeah.
Where the other parts just have to be even though it's not a wrong or right. And that's the other part I got to get out of my head. It's like, it's not a wrong or right, because all the other things can come right alongside it and totally stand. And so that it can take a little bit of the pressure in that way off. But yeah, I'm going to get excited. I'm going to try to get excited. Go ahead.
Do you know what you want the focus of the topic to be? Like, do you feel like you have to cover stuff that you're like, I'm not, like, I don't want to talk about this, and it's like there's maybe stuff that doesn't need to go in there that you feel obligated to have in there?
Great question. I don't think it's that. I think, I don't know. I may have to have you ask the question again. I think what it is, no, I believe what will talk about is foundational to everything else that I've done, that it would be able to come alongside of everything else as far as my courses and whatever and stand. But it's a way for you to sort of have, like, I have it physically so that you can be able to go through. I think it's just a thing of, like, maybe it's just because it does feel like it's my baby that you just don't want to do it. You want to do it its justice. And it feels a little weird being that I have courses, and I mean, dang, I'm running a boot camp right now on it. And maybe it's that, but I think overall, it just feels very, like, foundational, 4-act elements. And then also of just, like, being able to use that for plotting. And so, yeah, I don't know if I don't know. And I'm always just moving. I don't sit around and, like, kick it around. So if it just doesn't jam, something else feels like it takes priority.
Yeah, for
because we got something else to do. But this one, I feel like, nah, you just need to do it, even if it's just, like, the first version of it, and then feeling like I've been having students test the framework that I've been doing, that I put together. I feel really good about it. They've done really well, published, and readers are loving the framework.
That's great. So,
yeah, it is, but I think it makes it, like, all more, it's like, I don't know, like, I don't want it to be, I don't have perfectionism. I'm pretty good at, like, putting it out there and, publishing, once it's done. Maybe this just feels a little closer to home. Maybe that's what it is. It's weird. Like, the books feel like it's fun. Like, this feels serious. And I think that's probably why, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because when you sit down to write your fiction, you're having a good time. Like, it's just, you're playing and it's fun. And this feels like you just got stuffed into a blazer and a pantsuit, and you're like,
Yes, and I'm asked to go back to the law firm. Please,
Maybe that's the trick. You need to find, like, what makes this fun, and that might be the unique flair of your nonfiction as well. Is that, like, it's not, like, stuffy, bop 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 bop, but it's infused with your voice, and you're fun and funny, and that there's just, like, a little bit more, like, levity to it.
Yeah, I have this, like, and as we're talking about it, there's this one book that I absolutely love. I may need to reach out to her because I maybe would just borrow that framework. What she did was she sort of talked about story structure, and then at the end, she wrote a story to show it. And I think that might be the rub, where I can put, like, having the fun on the end of it just shows, like, here's how this can show up. And I think when you have a very fluid delivery of courses or even boot camps or workshops, it's dynamic. It's not stagnant like a book. And I think that's the other part, where the elements that makes it feel stagnant are usually ironed out when you have the dynamic parts of questions and answers or feedback and all of that you just don't get in a book. And honestly, that may be exactly why people do it, right? Because then they want to come over and be in that dynamic atmosphere with you. And so I just need to remember it.
Yeah.
And get excited. Like I want to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, next month we're gonna check in and be like, we're gonna check in and see like where are we falling on the pendulum of like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna suck it up, and I don't wanna, I'm not gonna, and we're just gonna keep checking in, guys, until Dana has a nonfiction book. That's just, now we just have weekly accountability, and like I said, at the end of the summer, get in those comments, everybody. Just, hey, Dana, how your nonfiction book do?
Girl, listen. It'd be like, same thing I was the last time you asked me. So with that said, listen, after I get off of Rachel's couch,
That's my specialty.
Come on. Listen, I appreciate it, baby, because I be ducking and dodging, girl. Listen. So we are going to jump back into our discussion of Cold and Deadly by Toni Anderson. In our last episode, we talked about the plot and the elements. And if you missed that, I strongly suggest going back. We try our absolute best not to have any spoilers. This is a phenomenal book if you are someone who wants to write a romantic suspense. I think also a phenomenal book for someone who wants to see multiple genres sort of being merged together and sort of melted together in a really great way. And today we're going to talk about the characters. And so before you go into the summary for this episode for characters, I'd love for you to sort of touch on some of the aspects that you would like for us to be able to discuss in our character episode for Cold and Deadly.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of the things I want to hit are kind of create like the way that she created opposites and the different mechanisms that she used to really make them different, which kind of makes them great together, but also introduces a lot of conflict. And I also want to look at how she really developed her characters through the lens of grief, and just talk a little bit more about how you can do that, and how to use sort of like a unifying concept or topic or thing to sort of draw like to draw parallels between your characters and to create that sort of sense of internal cohesion in the story. And then lastly, I want to talk about using the antagonist as a POV character, because she does that, and she, I think she pays it off, but it's really easy. It's first of all hard to do and easy to get wrong, I think. And so I would love to talk a little, particularly in a mystery, when you're trying to preserve the killer's identity, right? So I'd love to talk more about, when you use it, how it differs, so based on your genres, and like when you choose to use that POV character, as well as why you might choose to do that, and some of the potential pitfalls when you're doing that in a mystery in particular. So those are kind of the general overarching things that I want to hit. What about you? Are there any, in my list, are there any additional things that are on your list?
I do have I think they'll fold really well. One that I do have that I think that you didn't mention, I really found it interesting the way that she used Van's character as someone that we never actually met on the page. The fact that he sort of just like casts this long shadow, and I can almost see parallelism between Ava and Dominic when it came to Van's role in their lives, both personally and professionally. Professionally, it sort of was it almost mirrored the actual story, right? Because professionally, it sort of mirrors the external drive of the story, but then their personal aspects sort of mirrored those, sort of that internal part that caused grief to sort of hold them in the story. So I think it'll be around that development of that grief. But I did find that character very interesting, especially because for neither of them was that relationship wasn't a personal relationship. It wasn't like a parent or a sibling, or right, like you would normally see for them to go to this length, but it shows like the role that he played, and I thought that was a very interesting thing. especially when, as a little bit of a side, but not, they have those roles sort of filled in their day to day lives. They both had siblings. They both had a living parent, even though we'll probably talk about this in the creating the opposites as well as the grief. They did have death, and it's sort of like he sort of filled that space, plus other things. So I just thought that was interesting. And I think I don't know if it's about characters, but I do want to mention that I also found it's almost as if I don't want to say the FBI was almost its own character because of the way that she wrote it, but because we do talk about how it shaped and guided their lives, the fact that Ava's character, her stance as being someone new and the challenges that she's up against, as well as Dominic being someone who's seasoned, but also almost having a sense of nepotism that he has, that people feel like is present and he doesn't want it to be present. I think that kind of shapes the characters in another dynamic that they both have to sort of adjust and accommodate for to be able to do the big thing, which is finding out whether, this death was a suicide or if there's some sort of foul play going on. And so I have it down for characters. I think, as we always know, those things sort of overlap, but I think those are interesting things to be able to bring into character development.
Yeah.
So with that said, can you go ahead and give us the summary so we can get into this discussion?
Yes, ma'am. So, Ava Canis is a rookie FBI agent fueled by grief, conviction, and a fierce need to uncover the truth behind her mentor's death. She's driven but vulnerable, still finding her footing in a system that often silences instinct in favor of protocol. Dominic Sheridan is a seasoned FBI negotiator, calm under pressure but guarded in ways that hint at long-standing emotional scars. He's a man who knows how to handle a crisis, except perhaps when it comes to his own past. Thrown together in a high-stakes investigation, Ava and Dominic form an uneasy partnership. As they track a deadly threat, their dynamic slowly shifts from guarded professionalism to something far more intimate. But beneath the surface, both are wrestling with unresolved grief, family legacies, and the risk of trusting someone new.
So with that said, let's jump into the first topic that you wanted to discuss, which is creating opposites in this story.
Yeah. So something that I love the way that she set this up is she really designed this dynamic with the FBI in mind. As in, so Ava is hot-headed and at the bottom of the hierarchy. So the kinds of conflicts she's facing are wildly different from the kinds that Dominic does face and is facing within the FBI. So they're unified by by the fact that they're FBI agents, but they experience the FBI so differently that it shapes the way that they interact with that thing. And so we have Ava, who is she has strong instincts, and she's very, again, hot-headed is an easy way to describe her because she moves quick. She doesn't have the most tact. She is, and she's very fiery, right? Dominic, it's not just, and I love, because she takes this sort of one step further, right? It's not that Dominic is just a chill dude. It's not just that Dominic is, is just a more level-headed person. He is professionally trained to be a hostage negotiator. And a hostage negotiator, is required that they keep a cool head. It is required that they stay in control of their emotions and their fear and their, if you've ever, I highly recommend listen to interviews with hostage negotiators. It's so interesting the way, the strategies that they use and the way they approach situations in order to diffuse situations, right? So whereas Ava is very ready to just whoosh, go in guns blazing. In Dominic's line of work, you can't afford that. And you actually watch him, but when they're working with cops on the ground, actually watch him bump into issues where they want to go charging in, and he's like, this is how people die, right? And so the requirement of, it's not just I'm more level-headed, but like my job requires that I maintain a level head and that I'm thoughtful and strategic. And so each of them, right, is approaching the FBI differently, and their experiences require also they treat it differently. So we see early in the story that Ava, as a woman, this changes the way that she experiences the FBI. And we talked about this last week, where, you know, these are some blind spots that Dominic just has to, like, that he will run into with her, because he needs his perspective broadened, because his experience simply hasn't given him that. He doesn't have that information on the basis of his experience, but he also has these really powerful political connections, which shapes the way that people treat him, like in kind of an opposite direction. And he hates it, and he's very sensitive to it, and he's very guarded about that thing. And that also drives the way that it almost gives them something that they have in common, but again, on totally opposite experiential sides. So when we talk about her creating contrasting personalities, she really pushed to the far limits of using these unifying features for both of them, so that they're in similar situations, but they handle them so differently and experience them so differently. It is like opposites on steroids, right? Like, it's really the far opposite corners.
You know what? I totally agree. And I absolutely love the way that she allowed that to play out when you change their point of views and you start seeing when they're together and they are questioning people.
Yeah.
Her approach versus his.
Yeah.
And him almost knowing how she would see, like how she would come at it. And even from her point of view, she knows, like, when she says something that rubs him kind of the wrong way. I think this does a great job too of having those moments where it's a clashing of this sort of opposites attract, is the way we see it in romance, but then seeing it played out in this FBI dynamic and in this moment of them. I don't think this is a spoiler, but I think it's a great example from the story. When they decide that they're working on this, and neither one of them is supposed to be working on this, the way she goes at it versus the way he goes at it, he is still being strategic, right? Yeah. He knows he's doing something that he should not do. So therefore, the people he calls to even interact, he's going to make sure that they think it was their idea. And it was their idea to get these forensics and all of this. And I think what it does in the end is for her, it's sort of rough, what do you call it? Smooths out her rough spots. Mm-hmm. And for him, seeing the way that what she has to encounter, it makes him even more strategic, because even though on the outside to her it can seem like he's overstepping, he's also very aware that he can get away with things that she cannot, and he attributes that to seniority when everyone else attributes that to a power play or his political connections. And so I think we see that as both a positive and a negative. And when she starts realizing, like, okay, and she even tells herself, Dan needs to tell me you can catch more bees with honey, and she is still
working on that one. Still trying to figure out how to make that happen.
I'll do it next time. I don't got time for that now. And so I think that is a great thing. We see it in their roles. We see it in their, and then we also, I think, see it in a sense of how they handle grief. You know, she is handling that grief when it comes, which we'll talk about next, but it's still in opposites. And I like to, and we didn't talk about this in plotting, but I like it because it allows you to take a thing and sort of examine it from all these different angles and to get to a place where it sort of resolves a little bit. And so, you know, she is the one that's sort of wearing it on her sleeves, and she knows that it sort of can make her feel prickly and unlike herself. But if it means she solves this, then so be it. Versus Dominic is still sort of wrestling with having that vulnerability. And Ava just doesn't want it because she doesn't want it to seem like she doesn't know how to do her job. Not that she's afraid of the vulnerability. Versus Dominic, it's just, and I think it's, you know, a man woman dynamic. But I think the author picked well, because if you even look at the extension of their characters and the deaths that they had, that there's something different to lose your father than it is to lose your mother, right? And to having access to those emotions and feeling comfortable with expressing it. And by the time you add that to gender roles and his life circumstances and hers, it just makes for a very interesting way that I like to say that you want your cast of characters to balance each other. And we see that they both are experiencing grief, but the way that they are in different areas of this scenario causes them to have a sense of balance that at times beckons the one over to their side, and at other times pulls them to the love interest, you know, way of thinking, so that when it's all said and done, they have a sense of balance as much as you can when given these circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that's really the benefit. And I think this is also why, you know, opposites is probably one of the most popular sort of ways of shaping couples, right? And we often see this in, you know, I think this is very much mimicked in real life as well, right? Where, you know, we're attracted to people who help round us out, and who, you know, where we're places where we struggle or where our character is not as strong, like our, you know, just like our personal preference or whatever, you know, is not as strong. They have that strength, right? And so the benefit of those opposites is having two characters who are able to round each other out, who are able to present opposing perspectives, you know, with each other. And it makes it easy is overselling it, I think, because it's still work to do it. But it helps you to guide those transformations, right? Because you can show how they each have those strengths and they each have their weaknesses, and they're each moving toward, you know, shoring up their weaknesses and uplifting their strengths. So you can see that growth where they can learn and grow from each other, especially in a romance, but really in any cast of characters, right? Even if it's, you know, if there's no romance at all, we're looking at those relational dynamics and how they contribute to our transformation, as well as giving you those looks at different perspectives, different ways of handling grief, different ways we experience the world. And so using opposites is really useful, because it really opens up the world and allows you to get more into nuance and complexity, and using all of that to kind of fuel growth in your characters.
Mm-hmm. I also think that was very helpful here, because the bulk of what we're experiencing is their professional capacity. And the professional capacity is being disrupted by their personal attachment and love, which will also carry us over into the development through grief, because their professional capacity is affected by their personal connection and a professional connection to Van, who was the first sort of victim that we see on the page. And I think it really does help when we have those opposites, because both of them are choosing to handle it differently. And they can kind of almost like use it as a dig for the other until they realize, oh, essentially, this is just how this person works. When Dominic is kind of forced up against that emotional aspect, he isolates. You know, he goes for being on his own. And I think in a lot of ways, Ava does have that sort of tendency, but her her need for justice here, her need for understanding and to be heard, means that she doesn't give herself the room to be to isolate or to remove herself from the situation. And I don't think Dominic would have either. It was pain. It was another sense of loss. And it's almost as if you coddle yourself, right? Like almost like you retract without him actually knowing that he was doing that. And I think, again, like when we move into the area of thinking about the development through grief, both Ava and Dominique, they are experiencing grief in different ways. And this is not the first time that they have experienced grief with such an impactful person in their life. Ava was the loss of her father through violence. Dominic was the loss of his mother. And then the rotation of his father's multiple marriages that sort of just kind of numbed him to the whole thing. And for both of them, it sort of plays a huge part in this dynamic of their relationships now. But I think if it had not been for the professional aspect in ensuring that their mentor received both justice and that he had an opportunity, air quote, to be heard, then they would have been okay just sitting in their grief. Mm-hmm. And just continuing to operate, which is a telltale sign of like when you're building your characters, why them, why now, right? Like, why is it so important? And this is why. Even to the point of us coming into this story and we're at the funeral, the fact that we needed that disruption to even get this far to turn into the fact that this is a serial killer, that's on the loose. And so all of it, like, again, she just brought this together so well, and it was done, masterfully.
Yeah, and I think you're right there already getting at how she used grief to develop the characters and develop the story, because Ava's grief drives her to take action. Dominic's grief, like you said, kind of causes him to like not quite retract into himself, but definitely like, he is taking stock of his guilt. So with the death of Van, right, Dominic is like, wow, like how did I let my friend get to this point? Why didn't I check on him? Why hadn't I done more? And Ava, her instincts are just firing red flags, and she's like, nope, wrong, suspicious, like I'm not, and she gets in there, right? And of course, in this instance, like she's right to do that. And that's one of those places where Dominic is like, oh, like I had it wrong, right? Like he's like, she was onto something. And so I think that's the other way that Toni Anderson kind of makes Ava, and you kind of got at this a little bit last week, but makes Ava so that she's not unbearable. Because, sometimes when someone moves too quick, we get real tired of them real fast because then they're not thinking, and then we're just frustrated because we can see the pitfalls like a mile down the road. But Ava is right? And that's the thing, is like we can all relate to that feeling of like being right about something and not being listened to, right? And so it makes her more sympathetic because we understand, even if we don't agree with, like, if we personally wouldn't be like, I'm going to go talk to the director of the FBI and I'm going to just put myself out there, we understand that drive in her. So if she were just hot-headed and then doing dumb stuff and causing right, then we would just be like, oh my God, right? We would probably chuck her out and we'd be like, I can't with you, ma'am. But because her instincts are honed and she's right, and you have kind of that offset with Dominic being like, she's onto something and following it up and proving her right and seeing where some of that drive to claim her agency makes her move more quickly. It balances out the fact that she can be a bit abrasive and she can be a little bit tactless and those kinds of things. So it's really creating that balance to our experience of her. Because I think, a cool-headed character is easier for like a cool-headed professional who's very calculated and thoughtful and all that. We're like, okay, they're easier to go along with. It's the hot-headed characters can come off real bad real quickly in ways that we quickly don't like them. So I think that she played that balance really nice so that we didn't fall over that edge with Ava.
As you were saying that, like, I totally agree. The other part of this, I think that was an overflow that we didn't list, that I think it aligns here, is also that she, and I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week, but still, that the stakes of each of those moments were still very present, right?
Yeah.
That the stakes still brought them back to, she could be hot-headed, she could be, she could even be right and do it the wrong way. And all of it would have pointed to her potentially losing something she's wanted since her childhood.
Yeah.
And she had a right reason, like a justifiable reason of why she wanted this more than anything. And she kept saying, well, I need my job. And it wasn't like, I need my job, like I need money, even though she needed, to be able to live. But she needed her job because it was the way that she sort of righted the wrongs that she's lived through. And so even in her aiming to show up as herself and not let the politics of this situation get to her, she was also taking a huge risk. And we see that in her character as well. So when she's in these moments with Dominic and he's kind of trying to help her to see, like, this is how we ask this question. This is how we fall back and let them think they're bringing it to us, that he can help her. She also is giving him that sort of thing of like, show up, right? Like he's almost so concerned with things looking right so it doesn't look as if has nepotism, that he can sit back too long.
Yep.
Had they sat back on this, it wouldn't have ever been questioned because the thing, it's like the mic would have passed.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a very interesting dynamic. And I'll say this as well before we talk about the antagonist. I think this is one of those moments where, like, to put a pin in it for writers, right? I think this is where we don't hear it a lot. At least I don't hear it a lot. Where we realize as writers, like, you really are getting into the dynamics of what make people and what makes them click and what makes them lean in and what makes them push away and what, how does trauma affect people and how does grief affect people and how does love affect people. And it can be one of those things where if you allow yourself to be a student of people, even if we don't get it right all the time, this is where being a people watcher and nosy as a kid can help you. But it makes for having a very layered and dynamic story because this is life. And, just because you experience something really hard doesn't mean life stops moving.
Yeah.
Right? There's still cases like when he said for Dominique, like, we can't lose you. We don't have enough negotiators. We don't have, so therefore, every once in a while, Dominic had to push that button. Like, you don't even have time to grieve. When his closest friends and mentors' death, nor does his colleagues.
Yeah.
So it's just a very interesting moment for this author to select and have to cause these characters to grow under the state of a very extraneous pressure. This is a pressure cooker, and it's almost a calm pressure cooker, but it is a pressure cooker. Now, I kind of landslided us into the development through grief. Were there any other aspects that you wanted us to touch on? I think we kind of touched on the fact that she did use their past grief as well. That we had a present grief in Van, but it did knock on the door of and expose past grief for both of them. Her for her father in a situation she underwent, and him for his mother. and in his present relationship with his father and what he experienced. And I think that was a great way of showing like healing those wounds and exposing them so that they could be healed. But yeah, any others that you have?
No, actually, this is like the perfect like slide into maybe just a brief discussion on the antagonist,
Yeah, let's do it.
because the what Toni Anderson did so well here is she didn't just develop Ava and Dominic through the lens of grief. She developed her antagonist through the lens of grief, which was fascinating. Like the, I was, when I was listening back through it, and I just had forgotten about that, and I like was listening, and I was like, oh, sneaky
From the
woman, look at
beginning,
you.
yes.
Yes, and so I think that that's really like that is making full use of the opportunity that she had. And I think that's also like, when you're choosing to use your antagonist as a POV character, because this is kind of some of the ways that now this is specific to my genres as well, right? I'm in fantasy, I'm in crime. So using your antagonist, particularly in crime, as a POV character can be kind of a gamble, because there's a couple of things that can go wrong. So first of all, you're using the antagonist as a POV character, and sometimes on the surface, my writers will think, well, yeah, it adds tension because we're like, ooh, the antagonist and they're doing stuff. That's not always how it feels when we're watching the antagonist do stuff. So because in a mystery, you're having to preserve the identity of that antagonist. So it can add tension, and it can drop clues without revealing the antagonist's identity. However, because you can't name the antagonist precisely because you don't want to give away who they are, it can come across as real hokey. So you've got like, your first person, narrator of your detective. And then because you don't want to give away who the antagonist is, but you really wanted to put your antagonist there, you get the man crept through the woods and it just is like, yeah. And I've read them, and it's more common in like older crime. It's not as passable now, where it doesn't just kind of feel like you're maybe a little bit rolling your eyes, right? So when you're making that choice of whether you're going to use the antagonist point of view, the other thing is like sometimes my writers will want to add the antagonist point of view to add to the stakes, which it can, but sometimes it really just means you're undermining surprises, and rather than your audience being surprised by what happens, they like know what the antagonist is doing, and it doesn't deliver as well actually when it happens to the protagonist. So you're having to wait, like it's not as like straightforward, I think, as sometimes people are like, oh, I'm gonna add this in, it's gonna communicate this information, and then it'll make it like, wow, the protagonist is in danger. But it actually undermines all of those things rather than escalating them. So her choice to use the antagonist as a point of view character, I think she pulled it off really well, because she did use it to continue to develop this idea of grief, and to kind of give credence to Ava's suspicions, so that we know that something is lurking in the darkness, looking for our protagonists, and causing mischief and chaos, and continuing to move behind the scenes while Ava and Dominic get caught up. And so I think that, she made that choice, but she maximized her usage of, she didn't just give us the antagonist because it's like, well, I need to get him this information somehow. But she leaned all the way into that choice to say, how do I cover my tracks so that the mystery is preserved, but develop this idea of grief and add to the stakes and add to the suspense of it without playing my hand. And I think she did that. She made maximum usage of that choice, but it's a choice that you should think really consciously about before you just lean into using your antagonist as a point of view character. Again, at least for crime in particular, fantasy some, but crime especially.
I totally agree. I think one of the things for me that really stood out about that aspect was that, number one, I was very thankful she did it from the gate so that we saw it early enough so that when she did it later on, we were not surprised by it.
Yes.
I also liked that she did a great job of still progressing the actual investigation and helping us to get, while giving us context. So, the passage of time, how long this has been, that there is a list, things like that, that we became aware of. The final thing that I really liked about it, I think it's a final thing, was that I liked the progression of the sharing. If you look at each one of those scenes when there was sharing happening, that it wasn't just like a, bleh, dump everything out, right? It was growing progressively. Yeah, it was just strung along just right. So where you're just like, wait a minute, wait, was that? So it made you sort of question and doubt along with them. And I loved that. The final thing that I thought, and I think I said final twice, I know I had that bad, but the final thing is that I thought this was a great a great example of the difference between mystery, thriller, and suspense. Right? And that, you kind of said it like, mystery, you want to preserve your antagonist. And that's why I wouldn't have ever pegged this on its face as a mystery. There's mystery elements to it, but I just wouldn't have. But the fact that when you have suspense, we, the reader, know something is coming for them. And we know it right up front in Act 1, that the protagonists don't know, right? They're not clear on. So we get to see that play out. But then there is that shift to thriller where it becomes this personal thing. Like it was, and not to give that away, but I think this is a great, where you could sort of make some distinctions if you ever in your mind as a writer get muddy. Because here's the thing, to a reader, if it works, I don't care if it's mystery, thriller, or suspense. I don't care which one it is.
Yeah.
But to a writer, you want to know which pocket you're in.
Yeah, so you can do it with intention.
Exactly. And that's what I think this is a great example of that, because you want to make sure that you understand, okay, what bag am I in? Like, what am I dealing with here? Because it affects, are you doing those other POVs? What are you revealing? It can affect your pacing. It can affect that you may release some of the tension that you've worked so hard to accumulate.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important. And I think here, why I think it was masterfully done here is because I think if it would have been too much tension, it would have detracted from the romance.
Yeah.
Romance readers are not necessarily coming for all of that, like.
This isn't Silence of the Lambs. This is a romance, right? So, like, okay.
Exactly. Or you get to the steamy parts. We don't even care about the steamy parts. Get off the screen.
Yeah. Get back to the plot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or to the romance, people's like, get some more kissing. Yeah. And that's where, knowing your market and what you're going for and what your readers of that market is so important. And I don't know if, I believe she had to have done it intentionally, like having that sense of relief where we still get that exposure and we get the wholeness of this experience without it just continuing to press down on the protagonist. I think it just made it feel like there was a smoother delivery.
So just one of the things that I want to kind of like just offer about that too is if you go back to those chapters from the antagonist point of view, they're much, much shorter than all of the other scenes, right? So I think that's another thing that is maybe an underrated like takeaway here is like noticing that yes, we get from the antagonist point of view, but they are very, very short. They're little just insertions, and so she makes maximum use of them. But also it means that first of all, it's not wrongly redirecting our attention, right? So that we're confused about what this story is about or who this story is about. But also it means that there's that it's higher impact, and we have less of that time that we have to manage trying to cover the tracks of who the antagonist is, because we're staying very focused on kind of a single thing that the antagonist is getting up to, what's kind of going on in their mind. And, then we're going to hear about the after effects. So it almost raises more questions than it gives answers. And it's like it raises questions that get answered as the protagonists are investigating, right? So then so it helps with that. We're not revealing information that we want the protagonists to find out. We're raising those questions that are going to get answered in the protagonist scenes.
Mm-hmm. I would also say that, again, overall, I think it is nicely done. I think it helped with the pacing. I love the little tidbits of information that were given. It had me almost in a whodunit sort of feel, without being overly done. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I think that having that perspective added in here can help anyone who has issues with sort of like this pacing. And I may not say this right, but as someone who's a plotter, one of the things that I've always done when I had a romantic suspense is I always plotted the what the antagonist was doing at the same time, even if they're not on the page. And I think because they are on the page here, it can help you to see how that story arc goes, because it's the opposite of your hero. So when they are having a high, the antagonist, your hero is having a low, and understanding the repercussions of the actions of the other as they're dancing through this. Yeah. So having it on the page here, if you find that you wrestle with that, it's a great help to see what it's like on the page. Because you can sort of see what that dynamic is like in real time, if you will, in this story.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great point. And for honestly, for my thriller and crime writers, that is one of the things that we talk about in coaching. And I love this book as a great example of watching the interplay between the antagonist's decisions and the protagonist's experiences, so that even if it's not on the page, your story, you can feel that the antagonist is dodging and weaving and moving, and that escalates the stakes and adds to the tension of the story. Because if we're in a crime or a thriller, we are chasing an antagonist. So knowing that they are, at what point do they become aware that the protagonist is onto them or might be onto them? How do they respond? And this is also about developing your antagonist as a character of, like, what are their go-to strategies? Like, how are they covering over their tracks? You've sometimes got, you can have an antagonist that, becomes more violent. You have an antagonist who might present as a helper. You have an antagonist who might, try to get closer to the protagonist or try to get further away, but it helps you to develop the nature and the inner workings of your antagonist by saying, how are they navigating the fact that the protagonist is looking for them? What is their strategy here? And the nice thing about this story is the antagonist was a step ahead the whole time. Like, they were looking for the protagonist before the protagonist knew to look for them, and that was a part of the tension of the story and the stakes and the suspense element that was at work.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think, and I'm sure there's another term for it. Me in terms. I love a good tri-fail cycle. I love when you can be able to see it. I think it's something that is really great to learn if you don't know how to escalate tension or escalate the stakes. So when you see that on the opposite side, when you can see the tri-fail cycle of the antagonists, that what it helps you to do is to begin to see where that push-pull is actually happening. Yeah. And so I think the fact that she does it here, on which feels like it's on the surface, but it really is layered, is just, come on, Toni. I'm calling you by your first name.
Oh, we're friends now. Come on. Man, after that, we are friends now.
Come on, Toni. You better tell them how to write that story. So yes, I think the fact that it was always one step ahead, that it was intelligent, that it was patient, that it was methodical in the approach. It was not haphazard. And the fact that there was just like, there were a lot of people that were impacted by this. So it wasn't just about the romance.
Yeah.
And yet it was, right? So it's just, I think this was, again, a great, 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 great pick. Were there any other aspects of that? I do have one more about that. I was about to ask you if there's any more. So, dig it up out your brain if you got one more. But the other thing that I would say about this that made it just the antagonist as not just as a POV, but as a character here, and we're talking about it as a unit, is the fact that it brought out the emotional stakes as well, not just the external stakes. So it was just like you took time. You gave your antagonist and you gave that external plot as much time as you gave your protagonist. And it works. It works. And so I thought that was great too, because it was just, basically it was a disruptor all the way across the board. And no one, came out on the other side of this unscathed.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's a credit to, and one of the things that, you really want to challenge yourself to think about, if you're using the antagonist as a point of view character, it sure as heck better count. And I think that's the thing that I'm really, with all of my clients, I'm very conscientious of, like, why do you want your antagonist in a POV? Like, because if you're going to make that choice, you really have to make it work and make it count. And I think that she really did here. And she took every opportunity to bring in external and internal and to help kind of, to escalate the stakes, but also kind of muddy the waters for us, where we think we're getting clarity. We're actually getting, more, it's kind of helping to lead us astray, and but then we're watching the protagonist pick up those clues. So that interplay was really good and really powerful and worked so well. And so if you're going to do this, you got to really make it count and think through, why am I doing this? What is it going to serve in the story? And how am I going to maximize the value of adding in this point of view?
Yeah, and I would say to people, if you don't do this, because let me tell you, this may be one of them things you want to wait until you kind of got the other things locked and loaded. Mm-hmm. I would say even if you don't do it, you still want to give the same amount of care and attention, especially with this type of focus when it comes to external plot. The fact that it was a murder mystery, and then, escalate into a serial killer. So you would still want to know, what is your antagonist doing, and how do we feel the effects of what they're doing off the page, on the page?
Yeah.
Right? How our protagonists are affected by that, and how it shows up, and how does it require them to level up, step up, change course, etc. And I think when you're able to do that and that, then I think that helps not just with the stakes, it helps with your timeline. It helps with your pacing. Yeah. So it has so many profound benefits just by you taking that little bit extra time to sort of shore that line of your story up.
Absolutely. And I just want to squeeze in there, because this is my last kind of thing, is, no matter what, whether they're a POV character or not, to your point, knowing what they're doing, but also knowing what's driving them, right? That's key to your antagonist, whether they are trying to take over the world or they've committed a murder. Part of the exposure of why they do what they do is what makes them compelling. And that's in the course of the investigation, when your protagonist is investigating a crime, they are discovering motive, right? We're looking at all of these different people and all of the potential motives. That's part of what's interesting, is finding all the tea and finding out why there are actually more people than we think who would maybe be willing to murder whoever the victim was, and uncovering those differing motives, and then finding the one motive that, and the one, who is, I guess, motivated enough to actually go through this. Like, that's part of the discovery and part of what makes it interesting. And part of what makes it interesting too is that final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist of how do they react to being caught and how do they respond and what do they have to say for themselves. So that kind of care and attention, just like you said, whether they're a POV character or not, is really key to driving your story and what makes it compelling and interesting and exciting.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have successfully just wrapped up these characters. I will say that this is a full cast. The fact that this is a book one in a series shows, so you will definitely get more than that. But I think we have shown beyond a reasonable doubt why this would be a story that you would want to not only explore the plot, but explore these characters and the development of these characters and carrying off a story that really is a heavy hitter that doesn't feel like it. Mm-hmm. You don't feel that at all. Like, it just flows. And so before we wrap up this episode, was there any other elements about characters that you want to touch on before we bounce?
No, we hit the gamut and then some. So yeah, we'll be gearing up to talk some takeaways next week, which I'm looking forward to.
Me too, because I feel like this is one of those ones where it could kind of sneak up on you and you don't realize. But I think overall it is one where you may find yourself reading over and over again before you fully discover like the true layers that she has in here. And at the end of the day, it sort of started with a funeral, and the fact that it is driven by their personal connection to this man and turns out to be so much more. So with that said, y'all, this is our episode on characters, where we see that it is the backbone of this suspense, or this romantic suspense. But even though they're chasing this killer, at the end of the day, it is really about, their fears, their grief, them really looking in the mirror and seeing who they want to be and how they want to show up, both personally and professionally, as they try to solve this murder mystery. And so with that said, this is all for this episode. We will be back next week with our editor's takes. If you have not done so already, don't forget to visit us online at storydeepdive.com. Give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, let us know how you are liking these stories, and whatever platforms you listen to this podcast, don't forget to leave us a review. And we would love to interact with you all about the stories that we're reading. We will see you all if you are looking at us on YouTube, or hear us if you're listening to a podcast next week, where we will talk about the editor's take. And we're out. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.